The stones in these walls are real. They were shaped and stacked by ancestral Pueblo hands more than 800 years ago, and if you put your palm against them, you are touching genuine antiquity. But almost nothing else here is what it appears to be. These walls did not weather into this canyon over centuries. They arrived by train. This is one of the most visited places in Colorado, and it is also one of the most misunderstood, so let us walk it slowly and tell the truth about it. We are in Manitou Springs, Colorado, at roughly 38.86 degrees north and 104.91 degrees west, tucked into a side canyon just off Highway 24, about 5 miles west of Colorado Springs. Behind us, the ground climbs hard toward Pikes Peak, which tops out above 14,000 feet. We are sitting at about 6,400 feet, at the exact seam where the Great Plains stop and the southern Rocky Mountains begin. The rock around us is red sandstone, laid down when this whole region was a very different world of eroding mountains and shifting sand. It makes a warm, iron-colored wall, and somebody in 1904 looked at the natural overhang here and thought it would make a convincing stage. That word matters. Convincing. Everything you will see today was chosen because it would convince a visitor stepping off a train from Kansas City. Manitou Springs exists because of water that fizzes. Rain and snowmelt sink into the fractured limestone under the Front Range, and carbon dioxide, some of it rising from very deep in the earth along fault zones, dissolves into that water under pressure. What comes back to the surface is naturally carbonated mineral water, loaded with calcium and sodium and bicarbonate. There are still public springs in town today. You can walk up and taste them, and they taste faintly of soda and rust. This is Ute country. Long before any of this, the Ute traveled and hunted across these mountains, and the canyon just west of town, now called Ute Pass, was a major route between the plains and the high parks. The springs were significant places. The town's name, Manitou, is not a Ute word at all. It comes from an Algonquian language from peoples of the eastern woodlands, and it was applied here by white settlers who liked the sound of it. Look closely at the coursing. The stones are shaped, they are fitted, they are laid in courses that are genuinely competent. That is not fake. What is fake is the idea that this is a ruin. A ruin is a building that fell down where it stood. This is a construction put up in the early 20th century by paid workmen, out of stone that was dug up 300 miles away and shipped here. To understand why that matters, we have to go west. The real homeland of the people who quarried these stones is the Four Corners, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. It is high, dry mesa and canyon country, cold in winter, thin on water, and for roughly 1,000 years it held one of the most sophisticated building cultures in North America. Archaeologists call them ancestral Pueblones. You may have heard the older word Anasazi. It is a Navajo term, and Pueblo people have asked that it be retired, so we will not use it. They were farmers first. Maize, beans, and squash, grown in a place that gives you barely enough rain to try. They read the land for moisture, built check dams across small drainages, dug reservoirs, terraced slopes, and moved their fields as the soil tired. By around the year 700, they were leaving pit houses behind and building above ground in stone and mud, room blocks that grew into villages, and villages that grew into towns on the mesa tops. The original masonry was sandstone shaped with harder stone hammers, bedded in mud mortar, often with small stone chinking pressed into the joints and finished with plaster. No metal tools, no wheel, no draft animals. Every block carried by hand, every roof beam cut with stone and carried in on shoulders. When you understand that, the walls stop being quaint and start being extraordinary. They are the work of a society that could plan, organize labor, and build to last. The famous cliff dwellings sit in alcoves at Mesa Verde in southwestern Colorado, and here is the surprise. They are late. Most were built between about 1190 and 1280, in the final century of a 700-year occupation. Cliff Palace, the largest, holds roughly 150 rooms and more than 20 kivas. For most of their history, these people lived on the open mesa. The move into the cliffs was a change, and probably not a happy one. "200 years earlier and further south, the center of this world was Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Between roughly 850 and 1150, they raised great houses there, enormous multi-story masonry buildings. Pueblo Bonito alone grew to hundreds of rooms and 4 stories, laid out in a great arc around a plaza. Building it consumed tens of thousands of timbers, many hauled from mountain forests 50 miles and more away, without carts or animals. Duck through a doorway like this one and the scale registers in your body. The rooms are small, the sills are high, the ceilings are low. That is deliberate. Small openings hold heat, keep out weather, and are easier to defend. Now multiply this room by 600, stack it 4 stories high, and set it in an empty desert canyon under a sky with no light pollution at all. That was Chaco. Out from Chaco run roads. Not trails, roads engineered and deliberately straight, running for miles across broken country toward outlying communities. Nobody there had a wheeled vehicle, so the roads were not for carts. They were for people, and probably for meaning. The great houses are aligned to the cardinal directions, and to solar and lunar cycles. This was a society keeping careful track of the sky and marking it in stone. Then the 13th century turned hard. Tree rings record a long, punishing drought in the late 1200s, on top of a cooling climate and shorter growing seasons. But the trouble started before the drought. Archaeologists find evidence of violence, of villages built for defense, of trade networks fraying and religious life in upheaval. The move into the cliffs, into places with one narrow way in, fits a landscape where people had stopped trusting their neighbors. Guidebooks love to say these people vanished. They did not vanish. Populations do not evaporate. By around 1300, the Four Corners was largely emptied of its farming towns, and that is a real and dramatic event, one of the great migrations of North American history. But a migration is not a disappearance. Somebody walked out of those canyons carrying their children and their seed corn, and somebody arrived somewhere else. They went south and southeast, down toward the Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico, out to the Hopi Mesas in Arizona, to Zuni, to Acoma. The evidence follows them in pottery styles and architecture, in the villages that grow rapidly in exactly the period when the North empties out. Pueblo oral histories tell of migration as a long, intended journey with stopping places, not a route. The land here was finished. The people were not. This is the single most important sentence in this video. The descendants of the people who built these walls are alive right now. They are the Hopi of Arizona, the Zuni, the people of Acoma, and the 19 pueblos of New Mexico, from Taos down to Isleta. They speak their languages, keep their ceremonies, run their governments, and bury their dead. Hopi people call their ancestors Hisitsinum, the people of long ago. They are not a lost civilization. They are somebody's grandparents. So look again at this wall and look at the joints. That gray material packed between the stones is Portland cement. Ancestral Puebloan masons used mud mortar. Cement was not available to them. It did not exist in their world, and its presence in these joints is the fingerprint of the 20th century. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is in every wall here. So who mixed it and why? To answer that, you need to know what the 1890s were like in southwestern Colorado. In December 1888, rancher Richard Wetherill and his brother-in-law Charles Mason rode up on Cliff Palace. Word spread. A Swedish scientist, Gustaf Nordenskjöld, excavated at Mesa Verde in 1891 and shipped hundreds of objects home to Europe, where they ended up in Finland. And behind the scientists came the pot hunters, digging for the market with shovels and dynamite. The plunder was so blatant that it changed American law. On the 8th of June, 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Antiquities Act, making it a crime to damage or remove antiquities from federal land and giving presidents power to create national monuments. 3 weeks later, on the 29th of June, Congress established Mesa Verde National Park. Two Colorado women, Virginia McClurg and Lucy Peabody, had campaigned for years to make that happen. Remember that name, Virginia McClurg. She founded the Colorado Cliff Dwellings Association. She gave lectures, she lobbied, and she is genuinely part of why Mesa Verde is protected today. She also fell out badly with Lucy Peabody over who should control the park, state or federal. And in 1904, while all of that was going on, McClurg and a man named Harold Ashenhurst began the project that produced the walls we are standing in front of. 300 miles west of here, near the town of Dolores in the Montezuma Valley, there stood a mesa-top pueblo on private farmland. It came to be called the Blanchard Ruin. It covered more than an acre. Its central structure stood close to 20 feet high. It was a village in the open, on flat ground, exactly the kind of site the ancestral Puebloans lived in for most of their history. And it was in a farmer's field. Between 1904 and 1907, that pueblo was taken apart. Workmen, paid about $2.50 a day, went at it with shovels, rakes, and hoes. Something on the order of 1 million pounds of shaped sandstone came out of the ground. It was loaded onto ox-drawn and horse-drawn wagons and hauled to the railhead at Dolores block by block, a village reduced to freight. From Dolores, it went on to roughly 40 narrow-gauge railway cars and traveled more than 300 miles across the Rocky Mountains to the Front Range. Think about the effort in that. This was not a casual act. Somebody costed it, financed it, scheduled the rolling stock, and paid the freight. Every stone in front of you rode a train across a mountain range to get to a canyon it had no business being in. At Colorado Springs, the stone was transferred back to wagons and hauled up here. And then came the decision that turns this from removal into invention. The stones of a mesa-top pueblo were not rebuilt as a mesa-top pueblo. They were rebuilt as cliff dwellings, tucked under this overhang in the style of Mesa Verde, because cliff dwellings were what the public had heard of, and cliff dwellings were what would sell tickets. Concrete mortar held it together. The site opened to the public in 1907. It has been a private, commercial attraction ever since, owned for generations by the same family. And for most of the last century, it was presented to visitors as though it were an authentic cliff dwelling. It is not. It is a 20th century reconstruction, in the wrong architectural form, built of real stolen stone, hundreds of miles outside ancestral Puebloan territory. Here is why archaeologists mind so much. A site is not a pile of stones. It is stones in a position with a floor under them, ash in the hearth, pollen in the soil, a wall alignment that tells you which way the door faced and who lived next door. That context is the data. Once you shovel a village into a railway car, it is gone forever. Nobody can go back and read it. And there was an appetite for this. At the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, visitors could pay extra to walk through an artificial cliff dwelling, an enormous fabricated rock face with modeled dwellings and cases of genuine relics inside. America wanted the ancient Southwest as a spectacle, a stage set with real bones in it. The Manitou Cliff Dwellings were built for that market, and they arrived just as the automobile was about to fill the roads. Be fair to them. The site's own account is that the Blanchard Pueblo sat on private farmland, that the farmer intended to level it for more cropland, that pot hunters were stripping every unprotected site in the region, and that moving the stone was the only way to save it. That was a real dilemma in 1904. The Antiquities Act protected federal land. It could do nothing for a ruin in a private field. But that defense has holes. Edgar Lee Hewitt, the archaeologist whose approval the site still cites, appears to have had little regard for these reconstructions. In 1919, the Smithsonian archaeologist Jesse Walter Fuchs noted plainly that the Blanchard stone had been carted off by private parties and rebuilt in Manitou Springs. Preservation would have meant recording the site and leaving it in place. What happened instead built a business. "90 miles of highway west of here, the alternative exists. At Mesa Verde the dwellings sit where they were built, in the alcoves their builders chose, with the soil and the middens and the sightlines intact. You can walk into Cliff Palace with a ranger and stand where a family stood. Nothing was carried 300 miles to get there. That is the difference between a place and a display." In 2021, members of the Pikes Peak Indigenous Women's Alliance visited this attraction and went public with what they found, calling the presentation stereotyping and exploitative, and asking the operators to consult with Pueblo leaders. They report they never got a reply. TJ Atsai from Laguna Pueblo, a former ranger at Mesa Verde, put the harm plainly. "False information about our ancestors," she said, "forces living Pueblo people to keep proving that they still exist." If this story has caught you, go west. Mesa Verde National Park, Hovenweep, Canyons of the Ancients, Chaco culture out on its long dirt road in New Mexico, and the Ute Mountain Tribal Park, where the Ute Mountain Ute tribe protects cliff dwellings on its own land and guides visitors through them on its own terms. Those places are in place. Nobody moved them to be closer to a highway. So what do we do with a place like this? Not, I think, pretend it away. The stones are here now and they are real, and they have been here longer than most of the buildings in Colorado. But the honest label on this site is not ancient ruin. It is monument to how America once treated the past of other people. That is a harder story and a much more useful one. A village stood in a field near Dolars for 8 centuries. In 3 years it was carried away. Something was preserved. Something was destroyed. Both are true, and holding both at once is the only honest way to stand here. And 120 miles southwest, the descendants of the people who cut these stones are farming and voting and firing pots and waiting for the rest of us to catch up. The rock under our feet is red sandstone, and the wall behind us is 300 miles of argument, hauled here by ox cart and railway and rebuilt as something it never was. Come with your eyes open. Ask the hard question at the ticket desk. Then drive west into the Mesa country and see the real thing standing exactly where its builders left it. That is the visit worth making, and it is waiting for you. Thank you for watching. Follow for more trails of the world.